Good evening, everyone. Welcome. This is our fourth annual Libraries Lead the Way year-end event. Gives us an opportunity to take a look at some impactful and valuable opportunities that the library has had to make some real headway into our community and to celebrate them and to celebrate you as library supporters. I want to thank the supporters who make the work at the Library Foundation SD possible and enabling us to support the work of the library, such as the work that we're going to hear about this evening. My name is Patrick Stewart. I am the CEO of Library Foundation SD, and again, welcome. I'd like to take a quick minute to give a shout out to current and former Library Foundation SD trustees, committee members, Carnegie Society members, and elected officials who have joined us this evening, as well as our advocates who ensure that the public investment being made into our library allows them to do the amazing work, the great work, and the impactful work that they do every day. And to our donors, you just saw the names of many of our donors and supporters in the slideshow. Each and every one plays an important role. As you know, philanthropy is needed to keep this work going. And I invite you to participate by making a gift to support the Library Foundation. And thank you very much. Before we get started, 2023 was an eventful year for the San Diego Public Library and the Library Foundation. We had the ability to have our library master plan, our new multi-year look ahead at building out our library system, approved by the San Diego City Council after 5 years of working on this project. This year, with support from the Library Foundation donors, the library was able to expand its Excel program. This is an initiative that puts a library card into the hands of every single San Diego Unified School District student. And speaking of education, also this year, the Library Foundation supporters helped the library to expand its adult education programs. More importantly, its online high school programs that offer additional opportunities for adults to earn a nationally accredited high school diploma. And for that, we're very thankful to our donors, and we're excited to see these programs expand. As we will hear about more shortly, 2023 also saw an alarming number of book bans and challenges. And as part of the Library Foundation SD's commitment to standing up for intellectual freedom, we worked with the San Diego Public Library to assist them in joining Books Unbanned, a national coalition that enables young people across the country to access frequently challenged books through the digital collections of 5 public library systems. And that's why we're excited to present this evening's conversation with the 5 library directors whose systems represent Books Unbanned. Before we introduce them, I would like to introduce Eric Stroshane, our host and moderator for this evening's conversation. Eric is the Assistant Director of the American Library Association's Office of Intellectual Freedom. Eric, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me, Patrick. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. Why don't you fill us in a little bit on what the Office of Intellectual Freedom at ALA does and the work that you do specifically in supporting your library members?
Oh, happy to. So the Office for Intellectual Freedom, is entirely focused on freedoms that flow from the First Amendment and defending them at public institutions in the U.S. So I am an assistant director there, technically the assistant director for member services, and my principal responsibility is assisting library staff, library directors, administrators, and board members, whether they're at a school, a public, or an academic library, with facing challenges to intellectual freedom. So that could be book challenges, that could be book bans, that could be things involving challenges to programs or displays. We've seen a big uptick in challenges to pride displays and other LGBTQIA plus related programs, issues around meeting room use, and also First Amendment audits is kind of another one of the issues that we've been dealing with increasingly these days. So I'm in a frontline challenge support. So when someone is experiencing an incident like this, they contact us. We provide fully confidential assistance. That can be anything from just listening, if that's all that's needed, to really walking people step by step through different intricacies related to policy concerns, how to, from how to navigate your first challenge or how to prepare for it to, I've got an adversarial group now in my community, and they are challenging hundreds of titles and, causing issues at board meetings. So it runs quite a gamut. And I work with an absolutely amazing team there. And yeah, I can't say enough about the folks that I work with. It's a small crew, but everyone is unbelievably dedicated.
I have a quick question, Eric. Are there states that are immune to challenges, or is this something that's affecting all of us?
Yeah, so that's interesting. So our data is incomplete. It's as good as we can do, but it relies on the reporting that comes into us, and then that's augmented by what we discover through the media. So we know that we're not documenting everything out there. So there are some gaps in our awareness. But in terms of, states that are immune, no, there aren't any. There are a couple states that receive very, very few challenges, like Hawaii and Delaware are like year in and year out, kind of at the bottom of the rankings. But we have seen really significant upticks across the board. So rural communities, urban communities, no one has really been spared during this latest wave.
Well, I know our audience is eager to dive into this conversation with you and to also explore some of the ways that our systems are combating this and supporting one another. So if you don't mind, I'm going to turn this over to you and have you introduce our guests and get the conversation started.
Outstanding. Thank you so much, Patrick. It is my great pleasure to introduce you all to, well, I suspect you know this first person, Misty Jones, the Library Director of the San Diego Public Library. Also joining us, we have Nick Higgins, Chief Librarian of the Brooklyn Public Library, Tom Fay, Chief Librarian of the Seattle Public Library, Skye Patrick, Library Director of the LA County Public Library, and David Leonard, Library Director of the Boston Public Library. All right, folks.
Hi, everybody.
So what is it about book bans and book challenges that makes them so concerning for us, not just in the library ecosystem, but in democratic society?
Who wants to take that one? I'll chime in first, and then you all. I think we'll probably eventually be fighting over who gets to speak. They are, I mean, let's call it what it is. It's censorship, and it's a threat to democracy. And it's what I feel like this country, the thing about being a free country and is that you get to read what you want. You have that freedom. It's a very basic freedom. And when somebody starts to take that away, it's a slippery slope. What comes next, when they start banning books, and we've heard it, I think this year alone, the comparisons to the Nazi regime, this is where they started. And so I think that's what's so concerning is really the threat to democracy and the threat to freedom.
Yeah, Misty, I think you're exactly right. First of all, thanks to you and your San Diego colleagues for putting this together this evening. And Eric, we love having the support of you and your team at ALA across the country in all that we get to do. You were talking about freedom there, Misty. I'm reminded that on the front door of the Boston Public Library, we have the phrase "free to all," which we share as something that captures everything that we are about in public libraries. And freedom doesn't mean that you don't have to pay a fee to come in. It also means that you are free to pursue what your intellectual pursuits are, for what you want to read. That we now have the phrase "freedom to read," and in the case of parents and caregivers of our youngest ones, it's up to them to be in dialogue with their children about what's appropriate for them to read. But we're sure not going to let anyone else decide what someone else should be able to read. It really is a choose your own adventure visit to the public library.
I think I'm going to jump in right after David because he's reminding me of a really important quote by one of my favorite writers, Toni Morrison. And it goes something like, you have every right to monitor and decide what your children read. You do not have the right to monitor what my children read. And I think that's what the sticking point has been for me. As a parent to a young child, of course, there are many things I don't want her to see, but that's my responsibility. And that's my job as her parent. It is not my job to decide what other children and what other parents are allowing or disallowing their children to read.
And I think that one of the big issues you see in any kind of censorship or banning is it often comes down to attacking those with maybe the least voice in our society, or often are oppressed or suppressed as well. And I think we see that really in these efforts most currently.
Yeah, and I think I'll agree, like everything that was said too. Just you know, I think what's alarming about this sort of spate of book bans over the past few years, how it's increased so much. We haven't really seen a whole lot of this and keeping track of book bans and challenges. And, you know, maybe libraries and public institutions were caught a little off guard. Perhaps we weren't sort of like ready for it, but understanding it almost immediately as a way, because the books that are being oftentimes like that are being targeted and pulled from shelves are really what Tom was saying. They're you know, they really speak to folks who are already sort of, they in many ways are marginalized already within their own communities, whether, you know, it's you know, books that are by or about Black experience or LGBTQIA plus individuals. And you're talking about library spaces where oftentimes people feel the most comfortable, the most welcome. And even in those spaces, it's determined by some voices in the community, oftentimes the loudest voices in the community, that particularly young people who sort of relate to the experiences in these books and are being removed, it sort of says to them that they don't belong in the community and their voice doesn't matter. So that was the most alarming, you know, part about this new wave of book bans, particularly you know, in our library in Brooklyn.
Thank you, Skye, for bringing in that quote from Toni Morrison, which is so unbelievably salient in these times when we have these parent groups like trying to deny all other parents of the rights that they and their children rightly have. And thank you like so much for your leadership on this, Nick Higgins, in bringing this to be. You know, you and Tom both spoke about the targeting of marginalized communities. And I think this is not just important because it's, you know, marginalized voices and representation that are under threat, but also those, you know, when public libraries and school libraries are attacked, those who have the least means or options of getting these materials elsewhere are the ones whose access is most threatened, right? So it's part of what makes what you're doing so valuable and so important. So I'd like to turn it now over to Misty to tell us a bit more about Books Unbanned and how this program is helping to fight against these book bans that we're seeing.
Yeah, so I can tell you about us, but really it's Nick. Nick Higgins there at Brooklyn Public Library is the reason that we have Books Unbanned, and really that you're listening to all of us tonight, because you know, he's started this program. But what Books Unbanned is it's a way for us to be able to provide ebooks, e-resources, particularly in communities where they are being challenged and they are being banned. And it's opening up our collections because we all are very fortunate to be in cities where we're not seeing the kind of challenges and we're not having people trying to remove books from our shelves. So we're using that fortunate space that we're all in and sharing our collections with others that are outside of our community. Ours is completely 100% philanthropy funded, which is a kind of a sticking point in ours. We don't have a really healthy book budget, so we wanted to make sure we weren't taking books away from our community. And I think, you know, most of us, I think pretty much it is pretty, you know, philanthropy funded. And people feel really strongly about it, you know, and that's one of the reasons. But we really got involved because Nick started it, and Patrick was talking to Tom at a fundraising the fundraisers conference, and Seattle joined and was like, hey, do you want to do this? He asked me, and I'm like 112%, yes, we do. But it's important, and it's a way for us to be able to make sure that no one is deprived. If they want access to these books, they can turn to one of our library systems or to all of them, and be able to access these materials.
If I could just jump in after Misty and just give a virtual shout out to the Brooklyn Public Library to really take a step back. I think Nick really said it. Like, I think we were all a little bit caught off guard at the onslaught of censorship and banning and what was happening, that we really didn't know how to respond. And when Brooklyn approached each of us all individually around this idea of Books Unbanned and opening up our virtual or our electronic collections, it was really something that I personally hadn't thought of, like how to mitigate the impact of these challenges. And it was both Brooklyn Public Library and Nick Higgins forward thinking to get us out of our box and remember the mission, the why we are a public library, who are we here for, how do we provide access. And it was really just brilliant. And I think he's such a low-key guy that I think I feel like an obligation to kind of center him and center his leadership around this effort.
I mean, thank you, Misty and Skye. I mean, really, there are a lot of people who worked on it. Actually, in our library, it was one of the projects that we worked on that was sort of like, it came at a good time. It was like we were coming out of the pandemic, and we were all looking to sort of anchor ourselves again in the sort of like the mission and the principles of librarianship, get out of like sort of like the triage work of COVID and like get into sort of like looking at the horizon again. A lot of departments, a lot of individuals came, a lot of community members, a lot of board members, a lot of our people who were just interested, not even in libraries. We'd get letters from people who hadn't stepped foot in a library since they were kids, but they were interested in the idea because what it represented was this opportunity by providing a free library card to a kid in a different state who was at the business end of some of these censorship efforts in their communities, feeling isolated and alone, to an adult in New York State or Vermont or wherever writing to us. They saw in it an opportunity to sort of defend a democratic institution that is sort of under attack, whether that's a school, whether that's a library, whether that's elections or whatever. There was something that spoke to them about this particular intervention. And listen, I just want to shout out all of my colleagues here. I mean, I've been fans, from afar, of Misty's and Tom's and David's and Skye's and everyone. And this is an opportunity for me and Brooklyn Public Library to network and partner with other, like-minded libraries and build a network of support, not only for, our colleagues here, in the profession, but also to young people across this country and libraries who might not have, the voice to speak out on behalf of their public.
Yeah, and I think, the big thing in all of this, to the point of everybody coming together, how do you combat book bans? Just put more information out there than they can possibly imagine and keep it coming until they're swamped in information and everybody has access and has something to counter. And I think this really, moves towards that.
There's another dimension to why I think this is important. And I think Misty has said, maybe in our own systems, we're not seeing quite the outrage or activity that many of our colleagues are across the country, particularly in the more rural and suburban areas. I've seen a couple of comments in chat indicating that, but we're at least have the freedom to be able to say, look, there is a line here. And we know that it's not just about our patrons and our users' access to information, but it's also the signals to library workers who are under threat. And if this is in some ways, I hope, a form of solidarity, because not only is it the actual challenges or bans that have an effect, but it's the chilling effect of workers deciding, maybe I don't want to buy this controversial item anymore. Maybe I don't want to put it out on the shelf in public. And so these challenges and attempts at banning have an indirect effect on dampening library workers' freedom to purchase the information they would otherwise want to make available to their patrons, to their young people, to those who want to read.
David, I just wanted to add, Eric, before you go on, you're 100% right. And it makes me think the very first library system that I worked in is Greenville County, South Carolina. And Greenville County, South Carolina's board has banned the word banned at that library. You can't do banned book displays. You can't even talk about banned books. And now the only display that they can put up are in relation to a state-sponsored holiday, right? So, but they've taken this whole, and it's, I just keep thinking that's not the library system that I started my career. What happened? What happened? And it is it's an infiltration of people that are making decisions, that have an agenda, but they're not only they're making decisions for the community, but they're also making decisions for that staff, and they're frozen. The staff are terrified to do anything. They're quitting. They're saying they're like 15 people a month quit that system. It's insane. And I just, you feel like, it's like reaching out and telling them, hey, we're here and we're trying to do whatever we can, for you, but we're understanding, but.
Yeah, it's interesting. In the chat, Jennifer from it looks like Central Virginia is talking about just that. There's sort of a sort of like a shift in maybe there's folks coming to a school board meeting and being really loud or causing a lot of disruption, and it's sort of like these typically pretty staid and sort of procedural kind of meetings and gatherings. Democratic sort of like slow deliberate processes are being disrupted and overturned. And what you're saying, Misty, is sort of like you can provide sort of as a larger library system outside of that context, a little bit of an intervention, almost like an emergency room visit. Okay,
Right.
Well, here's something that's happening. Here's sort of an opportunity, or at least to get you over like this hump. And we can provide some access to a bunch of different books and ebooks and content and things like that. And we can represent what a library actually should be. Just robust access to a collection. We're impartial to what you want to read. Banned books or not banned books, whatever, just read whatever you want. But there's something about sort of changing the environment around, what's happening on the ground. So perhaps like down the line, I mean, we're all here in this fight, so we don't actually need emergency room visits. If you want to put like a public health lens on, you want to change the conditions around those sorts of activities that are popping up across the United States, these well-networked sort of groups that are really just, it's not just libraries, it's, it's democratic institutions. It's sort of like the way that, we sort of want our communities, or used to want our communities to be built, are sort of being challenged, and there's something to that. It's something about really being active and sort of stepping out of our comfort zone and taking some big swings, and getting others like folks on this call together to see if we can come up with some solutions.
I'd also like to take a moment and reject the premise of some of these attacks that that libraries are one-sided institutions and therefore not serving everybody. I can certainly walk by any of our shelves and find things that I would find offensive as well. Like, it's the definition almost of a good public library is as something to offend everybody. So in some ways, I want to reject the premise of this attack that we are about serving everybody. We are about, whether regardless of religion, politics, stripe, whatever identity you want to cite. And so the idea that we're on one side and not the other is just absurd to begin with. So it illustrates that this is actually a politicization of something that is supposed to be a nonpartisan or neutral and trusted entity in society. How do we get back to the days where libraries are convening and trusted institutions for dialogue among people who have different opinions? We can be in the space together. We can read different books together. We can possibly share ideas together. That's what will make this a functioning democracy, not polarizing or politicizing each extreme.
That's absolutely right, David. And I think you're getting to the very crux of the issue there. One thing that I love about what you've all been talking about is kind of like the ecosystem of libraries, how we all have to come together to help, people at other library types or at other institutions across the bounds, across state boundaries. And you're also talking to, essentially the battle against censorship is enshrined in like all ethical principles of librarianship. And what I'd like to hear you tease out a bit more now, if your game is like what makes that absolutely vital to the work that librarians do? How did that become core, the opposition to censorship and the openness to all ideas?
I think when you look at it as very core today, if you take it to its end game, let's say all these books might be banned because abortion is illegal in these states. All books will be banned from any school, potentially any public library. So you are actually moving to people not knowing. A 10-year-old girl today may become a 16-year-old teenager who needs this information, but will not even know it's available because in her upbringing and in her schools, in her libraries, there's not a single mention about it, other than the word on the street about what could be done. That's the one worst case example, but it is the lack of knowing. I mean, one of our campaigns this year is Freedom to, and it's reading, knowing, thinking, but knowing, freedom to know what is going on in this world, what the options are in this world. And that's what's under attack, the complete control of information and lives, because you can actually control what people know.
And so, right, what Tom is saying, it's like a matter of public health. And I think Nick even kind of alluded to it. It brings me to a story. When I was still on the floor as a teen librarian, I had a teenage boy approach me and, in his very coy, sort of shy and embarrassed way, he wanted a book to understand what was happening to his body. Completely like innocuous, just he didn't know. And I think every day when I imagine those young people who just need to get accurate information, and by accurate, I do not mean the internet. The internet is a marketing scheme. We all know it. It has nothing to do necessarily with accurate information. In fact, there's a lot of mis and disinformation there. But we have the ability to help young people or people in general understand themselves. And so, I think about a lot this idea of libraries providing perspectives. That I think is one of the most important things that we do with our collections, and what we do with accessibility is to provide different perspectives. And we're all better for it, quite frankly. I think about my kid who's at school and she's in this like very multicultural, very diverse school here in Los Angeles. And I wouldn't have it any other way because she gets to learn about other people. She learns tolerance, she learns acceptance, and she learns how to be part of a community rather than be separate. And a lot of that has come from her reading, has come from her being willing to be open to difference. And I think that is one of the benefits that we lose every time one bans a book.
Just to give a little historical perspective, even though I'm probably one of the non-librarians in this group, the original purpose of reference work was always to give people access to the information they need so they could answer questions for themselves. That we are as library workers not the ones answering a question or giving necessarily a fact, but just getting people access to their resources, to the information, so they can make up their own minds. So that in some ways flies very much in the face of anything to do with censorship, which would be the very opposite.
Funny, because I feel like there's so many with these bans and with these challenges and challenges to libraries is keep hearing this, you know, libraries are woke, and when did libraries become, you know, like political, and you know, what is their agenda? What's the library agenda? And you just want to say, you know, our only agenda is that we want you to be freaking educated. We want you to be educated. We want you to have knowledge. We want you to have information, and we want you to have that at your fingertips, readily available for you, so that you can make your own decisions, and you can make the decisions that are the best for you and the best for your family. And that's it. You know, I mean, if that's such a nefarious agenda, it's a really sad state, because I mean, ultimately, deep down, it really is, we just want people to be the best versions of themselves, and to provide them the resources to do that, to be that.
Yeah, 100%. I was listening to David talk about how, you know, you don't agree with every, you know, idea that's represented on the shelves in your library. Though I told my son after he asked, like, do you have to read all the books in the library to be the chief librarian? I said, absolutely. I read every single book on the shelves of our library. I said, son, I don't agree with all the ideas that are represented in them. You can make up your own mind. Of course, he doesn't believe that anymore. It's sort of a joke that we took a little bit too far, probably, with him. But you know, there's this idea that there's a space, a library, that has all these representative, like, points of view that sort of, like, contained within the walls of the library are sort of like the great sort of ideas that have been generated, and some not so good ideas that are generated throughout history, and points of view and perspectives. And a library is a space, like Eric Kleinenberg would talk about this a lot in some of his writing, is that, like, social cohesion actually requires us to sort of, like, wrestle with these ideas with one another in a space that's shared by everyone. It requires sort of, like, frequent sort of, you know, interaction with other people, perhaps that don't have your, you know, same background or share your point of view. I mean, any sort of, like, you know, author that, you know, talks about sort of, like, the history of, like, you know, authoritarianism or tilting toward, like, authoritarianism will talk about these spaces like libraries that are shared. Everyone has a shared responsibility for the books on the shelves, but also the people that you find in these spaces, that you know, you have an opportunity to sort of, like, model a sort of a dignity, or sort of like a respect for other people, and you can only do that in these spaces. And if you only do that by sort of, like, having sort of, you know, a sort of a common respect for one another, that, you know, might not agree with everyone, you know, that you come in contact with, but you're going to give them space to sort of, like, tell you about how they feel and how they think, and to be open, you know, to that, rather than sort of, like, you know, retreat into your own sort of, you know, sort of isolated world. You have to be out there in to do democracy, essentially, and not just sort of, like, retreat and say that I believe in you know, diversity and access and all that kind of thing from an armchair. But you have to actually go into these spaces and actually practice it. And that's the power of a public library. I think that's sort of embedded in everything that we do.
Nick, that does mean that we need to be in dialogue with those that are willing to be in dialogue with us from a censorship position. And I don't think, I agree with one of the commenters in the chat that they're not all equally motivated. I think some people are just, you know, afraid of certain ideas, or you know, afraid of difference, where if it's someone we don't understand, or don't have the same lived experience, then we react against that experience and don't know how to incorporate it into our own lives and society. But there's another dimension to this, which I think is pure politicization. And all of our conversation so far assumes that these are rational decisions. And, you know, for better or worse, human beings are as much emotional as we are rational. And so that's the package we have to try and unpack if we're to be in dialogue with those that don't agree.
I wanted to make a quick comment, because I'm playing devil's advocate in my mind, and this one keeps coming up sort of in my periphery. Let's face it, none of us have an endless book budget, a materials budget. Nobody has as many books, except for maybe David on this call. Maybe only David. to seemingly have an endless amount of resources. So by extension, we are limited in what we can provide. And so some might argue that that in itself is censorship. I would argue that it's not so much censorship, because what our collection management teams are responsible for is ensuring that we have a weighted and representation and a weighted point of view, meaning that as many topics as we can, we try to have the pro and con, or the this and the other, so that we give you an opportunity to make up your own mind. So I want to kind of call that out a little, to say that yes, indeed, no one can have all the books, except for, again, maybe David on this call and the Library of Congress. But the goal is to have fair and equitable representation. And so when you think about equity over equality, what you might be seeing at this point in time is that these voices who have historically been marginalized or silenced have been uplifted, and they tend to be more centered at this time. So, you know, that's another conversation that we should likely have in this arena around equity versus equality, and representation versus censorship.
Thank you so much for that, Skye. Those are incredibly important issues. And yeah, right, selection is very different from the process of removing material. So in like selection, you are adding voices, you're adding representation, perspectives, and ideas to the collection, and making those accessible to all in your service area, or if you're doing it nationwide, to truly to all. Whereas when books are removed from the collection, you are taking those voices away, and you are reducing access to those ideas and eliminating that representation. So very, very different end of the spectrum. And like I think you very eloquently deconstructed the positioning that selection is like also a form of censorship somehow. I would actually, because so few actually know how libraries go through the process of selecting materials, and because you kind of like opened that can of worms, Skye, and started to talk about it, can we just go into it a little deeper? How does selection work? So how do these books wind up on the shelves?
I nominate David to answer that question.
Because you have so many books, David. How do your books end up on the shelf?
We're gently poking fun at our colleague.
We're on the non-librarian again for the most librarian-like question in the world.
We'll pick up where you leave off.
Sometimes though I do get to ask questions that others perhaps do not, and so I've learned a lot from my colleagues at Boston Public Library in terms of how they do their work, build their expertise. So for us, we have a combination. We have a central collection development team that's primarily responsible for overseeing the selection of materials by category, by age group, and then all of our public frontline service librarians, both in our branches and in our central library, have the ability to participate in committees that are organized by the collection development team. And so it's a very, very thorough process with a lot of eyes and a lot of voices, taking input from, you know, what the publishers are getting ready to release, following certain authors, following particular book series. What are our patrons actually asking for, whether it's particular author talks they come to, or whether it's suggestions that they make through our online forums. And so it really is a broad range of inputs that determine what the needs and desires are, and then a broad range of analysis of what is available to us to buy, whether it's from the big six publishers, whether it's through our distributors and aggregators that we all work with, whether it's ebook or print content, whether it's magazines, fewer DVDs and CDs than we used to, but it's not at zero yet. So this is a multimedia proposition across the enterprise, and it's not just at one time of the year. It is constant and it is ongoing, and so there is always room to keep adding to what is on the list for purchase until we run out of that money that Skye reference, that is not actually bottomless. I assure you that is certainly not the case. You know, I mean, so I think that's just a very high level view of the process. And then they show up and they get processed and they get distributed either to our whole shelves. So we find today many of our patrons who want physical materials are more likely to put a hold on something and request it than they are to go browse a shelf and just pick it up. Or in the ebook world, you know, it's the same process, but it's available instantly as soon as it becomes available, and you're at the top of the queue. How did I do, colleagues?
You did great. You did awesome.
Great.
But might I add that these are highly capable, highly trained subject matter experts who have master's degrees. Some of them have PhDs. Some of them have been working in collections for years and decades. They know what they're doing, and they're taking not only the professional aspect of collection development and management, but they're also taking in feedback, as David mentioned, from our communities. We all have some sort of like community input on our website. Somehow you can, you know, recommend a book or recommend some sort of a book or DVD if you all still have those. And so it is a coalition of experts and people who desire certain materials. So none of this is done in a tuna can. In other words, it's like a big, laborious process that happens iteratively and all throughout the year. So I think you did great.
And across multiple languages in many cases as well.
Thank
so
you. Yes.
not just English. You know, that all in free to all has got to mean all, and it means everybody, and that has to include uplifting voices that might have been left out of previous definitions of what all means. And so there really is a lot to pay attention to in the collection selection process.
And often multinational purchases, right? I mean, we're not just buying from this country, we're buying wherever we can get that material.
Yeah.
If it's made, we'll try to get it.
So what I'm hearing is trained professionals making data-driven, community-focused, public-informed decisions and working as a coalition to do so. So it's not just like someone's own views on the shelf, right? This is, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're right, Eric, including things that you yourself may not like or think is what you would want to share with your own children, but someone's requested it, or it is a book that has met the standard and so still goes on the shelf.
We have policies that guide the process.
And I think the perfect example of that is, and one that I kind of use when people, you know, ask about it is, and it was in, I think, a chat, you know, one of these chats about a particular book that people didn't like, but they're like, well, I guess you'll just let kids read Mein Kampf. Well, guess what? You know, we have Mein Kampf in the library. I mean, and that is, you know, it is a biography. It is of historical significance. And absolutely, do I agree with it? Absolutely not. But do people have a right to read it if they want to? Yeah, they do. And
We all have it.
We all have it. We all, the anarchist cookbook, you know, we all have it.
Yes.
So there's, and David, I think, said it perfectly. There's something that's going to offend everyone in the library, and that's the point. That's the point.
And all of our collection development policies actually, I think, well, at least ours does, I'm sure yours does too, and most do, have processes for a legitimate challenge where, you know, you are maybe concerned about whether something is on the right shelf for the right age group or whatever. And so it's not like there isn't a process to raise a question if something is concerning. In most of the conversations where that comes up, though, it allows a dialogue between the librarian and the concerned user to say, what is the real concern about? What is it that it is here, that you are going to run a program about it, that maybe it's not age appropriate for your child? So it facilitates conversation, which is really, I think, the important point about a strong and indeed updated collection development policy.
And
And I just want to and I'm sorry, Nick, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
I just wanted to double back on this because I think it's really important for public to understand that once a book is challenged, it goes through a series of meetings and conversations, and a whole team for our library, a whole team of people read it from front to back to understand what the issues are, what the challenges are. I was at a bookstore and I took my daughter, and there, I don't know if most of you know this, but Shel Silverstein wrote adult books as well. I found out the hard way. And so this is what David is like alluding to. So maybe it's not meant to be censored, but it's certainly in the wrong area of the library. In this case, it was full nudity, all the things that you can imagine in the children's section. And because that staff person wasn't trained, they didn't know. They saw Shel Silverstein. They thought, okay, this is a kid's book, but it wasn't a kid's book. So fortunately, I caught it before my daughter did. But there is a time and place for all things.
Yeah, I think that, you know, and Kim in the chat was asking about this very question, sort of what's the importance, or like how do collection development policies sort of like inform these decisions? And you know, the comment is like, so few libraries seem to have current collection development policies, and you're talking to like 5 libraries who are fairly transparent about their policies. They're probably on our website, sort of like what guidelines sort of inform collection development. And David articulated a lot of those when he was talking about their collection development policy in Boston. But there's also this really important, like how do you as a member of the public challenge a book that you find objectionable on the shelf in your library, which I think we started this conversation about the First Amendment, and one of the freedoms of the First Amendment enshrined there is the freedom to petition government. And we're quasi-government agencies, we're direct government agencies, and we reflect the values of our local government. You have the right as a community member to come in and challenge those decisions. And we welcome that. I think, Tom and Skye, we're all talking about like bringing people into the conversation. I mean, this is what I'm going to sound like a bumper. This is what democracy, looks like. I'm a bumper sticker at this point, but you need to have engagement with your community, and it is deliberate. It has a process. It's slow oftentimes because the people who are challenging the book need to read the book cover to cover oftentimes. The committees that are absorbing that challenge will also read the book cover to cover and find the objectionable content and discuss it. It has layers of different sort of like checks and balances that need to be sort of gone through, because it is a very serious thing to remove a book from the shelf of a library. It's a very serious thing, and it can't be decided in a shouting match at a school board meeting or across a reference desk with one of our library workers.
And I think that part of that is that it's the book as a whole, right? It's not one single part. And I think that is where these challenges now they're focusing on, like, for instance, genderqueer is, I think, on everybody's, that number one, challenged book. If you read the book as a whole, I don't even understand how anybody could, find it offensive. Are there some explicit sentences in it? Yes. But it's part of the entire story and that author and that person's experience. But you don't take something off the shelf because it has some sentences in it that you don't agree with. And I think that's where that's something new that I'm seeing, is it's like people picking out, it says this on page 16, paragraph 2, and that's where they're probably people are looking at it as a whole.
Yeah, they're going for a gotcha moment, or to take one piece out of context, or to lose all nuance entirely. And again, I mean, honestly, kids are resilient. They will find access to information wherever they can, where they want it. So would you not rather them do it in a more constrained context, where maybe they have an access to a guide that can answer questions? But it's about Mein Kampf, if you really want to use that example from earlier, or genderqueer, or All Boys Aren't Blue, or whatever the favorite one is right now. I think some of this is about understanding diversity so that you're exposed to different life stories that you might not otherwise be able to see. For those of us who grew up differently than others around us, being able to see ourselves represented in books and in fiction and in nonfiction around us is like a lifeline if you don't have role models in your own community. So this is not healthy, this practice.
Yeah, it's almost like it's driven by a fear of the capacity of titles like genderqueer to cultivate empathy for, marginalized communities. In this case, ones that were not visible at all a couple generations ago, right? So that's part of what seems to be driving it. Let's get back to Books Unbanned specifically for a couple of questions here. So you're all participating in this. What kinds of responses have you been seeing in terms of, engagement with it and in terms of public response once you kind of have announced this?
So being fairly new, because I certainly don't want my statistics to come after Tom and Nick's particularly statistics. So we started ours in October. We have 775 library cards issued now. And they're from all over. I mean, we're seeing people from heavy Florida, heavy Texas, but New Jersey and Virginia, and so but we did some pretty targeted marketing in Florida, Texas. So I think that's kind of driving it, but really we're seeing Oklahoma, and it's been overwhelmingly positive. I mean, really, people are appreciative. The people that are participating. I have one quote I wanted to share from someone in North Carolina that said, I love reading, but I'm currently unemployed and live with my very conservative family. If I want to read about queer or what my parents deem radical books, I have to hide them, and physically owning them can just be more trouble than I need. And I think that's the reason we're all doing this. So.
Yeah, I'm sneaking in before we build up to Nick and Tom as well on the numbers world. So we started about the same time, about 1,500 registrations, and from all 50 states, incidentally. And ironically, which Misty and Skye will love, the largest number was from California for our Boston program. So I know California is a very, very diverse state. So we'll take that as read. But also Texas, Florida, and North Carolina figure highly as well. For us, it's open to anyone in the 13 to 26 year age group. I think we all did our own slightly different take on how to do Books Unbanned, which is part of the beauty of the program. And about 50% of those are of people under 21. So this is clearly appealing to the young people who need it and don't have access to this material for whatever reason in their home locality, as well as for those that maybe work with young people, young teachers, or people who are young adults of a slightly older age.
Yeah, so I'll jump in and segue to our other libraries. So we also started during October National Banned Book Week. I think we all kind of lined that up appropriately. Our program is a little different than David's and the national programs, and definitely different than Misty's, who is a national program, but for a selection, a specific collection. Ours is our entire collection, but only for the state of California. So and because David said it, we're a progressive state, but we also have the East versus the West in the state of California. And so we have a lot of smaller factions or areas that would be considered highly conservative, very red, not to say that that's a bad thing, but typically that's where you're finding a lot of these challenges are in more of the red areas of the states. And so our Board of Supervisors really wanted to focus in on the state of California. And as Misty alluded to, really utilize local tax money and local dollars for the state, rather than the United States writ large. So that's how we've done ours. And I would say I think we have about 400 registered, and I'm sorry, I don't have the checkouts, but it's been overwhelmingly positive, and it's allowed us to raise some private funds to supplement the collection.
Yeah, and I'll go as the second eldest, I guess, in this group at this point. Although maybe I got you all beat by age, but I'm not sure about that one. We have somewhere close. We're moving towards 7,000 users at this point, and probably close to 100,000 checkouts. We've been going since April of this year. We were hoping to get on a little sooner, but we had a few more things we needed to make sure we had settled with our foundation, who has been a huge partner in all of this, from the marketing to obviously the fundraising to make this happen. They have been incredible, and we're on it day one. And they've had a goal to raise 100,000, and they are nearing that goal this year. And they've already signed on board for next year as well. So a lot of good work. I will say it's been every single state in the country and every single U.S. territory at this point. Some of the states are, as you can imagine, but then sometimes we see a lot from Washington. We have an eastern side of the state that is a lot of very rural areas. Sometimes it doesn't come to just the politics, that divisive politics that we talk about today. Being a kid that grew up in a rural area, and you're 40 miles from a library, chances are you're not going to a library. So, I mean, you see a little bit of everything, to the saddest stories, just like Skye or Misty mentioned. Things that'll break your heart. We have thousands of them on file from people who have signed up.
Yeah, Tom, I grew up in a rural area in Iowa and Minnesota, and it's similar. It's sort of like you don't have a driver's license, and you can't get to the library that easily. And then when you go there, it might not be a collection that is as robust as you might need as a reader. And I'm glad that you mentioned that, because like a lot of letters that we get, I mean, we were sort of surprised by that at first. We thought that perhaps we didn't even know how long this might be appealing to people. We offered cards to kids 13 to 21, young people 13 to 21, anywhere in the country. Now similar to what Tom was talking about, we have all 50 states, territories, have about 7,500 cards out there, about 10,000 checkouts a month from these cards, from these young people. So there is sort of like an impact on their collection. They're readers, they're reading everything. They're not just reading banned books, they're reading whatever's in the collection, just like a normal library user would, romance novels and like cookbooks and, anything. And that's what we sort of like want to see. We want to make sure that a young person has access to a robust collection to demonstrate what a library can be, for people who might have some restrictions at the local level. But yeah, I think that we were a little bit surprised at first. There was a big surge in demand for this. We thought that perhaps we would do this program for about a month or two, maybe through the summer after it became a little more popular, but realized that there was certainly a lot of a lot of young people were struggling. The letters that we received, absolutely heartbreaking. Everyone remembers, I hope, what it was like to be a teenager and how difficult just in general that is, and just sort of like trying on new identities all the time, just feeling a little bit out of place or a lot out of place in different places, as you try to, figure out how you want to walk through the world. And, again, as I mentioned before, just like going into these spaces they should be there for you, places where maybe there's like one or two places in town that you feel comfortable in, and one of them's a library, but even there, people are telling you that you don't belong. It can be devastating. And, it was those stories, it was those letters that we received from young people that certainly kept us going. And we understood that we were doing something in partnership with everyone here that was very important and vital, to the health of not only our own sort of like, library community in Brooklyn, but also to the reader community out, broadly speaking, in the United States. And, I mean, we, again, like sort of mentioning the sort of like, emergency room kind of intervention, but, there's also something here about sort of really supporting young people who, they will be the future library supporters and advocates. They're already some of our most vocal, supporters and advocates at this point, but, doing everything that we can to make sure that just for our own selfish sort of longevity, we want to make sure that we develop and nurture that goodwill that we've been fortunate enough to inherit over time, but develop that again and root it in this next generation of folks who are coming up, and look at public institutions like libraries to step in and stand shoulder to shoulder with them, on important issues like this. But yeah, no, we've a tremendous amount of support, tremendous amount of feedback, and heartbreaking letters for sure, but also a lot of appreciation by and large.
Well, Nick, we've been notified that we are running out of time, unfortunately. But I think it is so wonderful that we had a chance to end with those comments, especially from you, who helped kind of get this started for everyone here. This has been inspiring for me, who works day in and day out with folks who are suffering through book challenges and threats to, in some cases, their position at a library. Just to know how thoughtfully you all are approaching this and the work that you are doing to kind of ensure this access. And we are being rejoined by Patrick, I think, to move into the next phase.
And just before Patrick comes back on, I want to acknowledge that in each of our 5 areas, it's really been a partnership between the library and the foundation or fund and supporter community, whether those are electeds or private individuals who have made this initiative possible. And so I know this is San Diego's webinar, and it's a lot of your supporters that are on here, but I think we have a few of our own supporters watching as well. And so I think this is going to take all of us as we go forward, not just on this topic, but the role of libraries in democracy. So thank you for giving this a showcase.
Well, David, thank you. And Eric, thank you. Nick, Tom, Skye, Misty, as always. I think this has to be honestly one of the most insightful conversations on this topic that I have been privy to in the last 4 or 5 years. Misty and I have chatted about this with media. I've talked with several of you about this throughout the course of the last couple of years. And I can't thank you enough. We just traveled through not only the dangers of challenges, but how we all are using our individual resources and our collective resources to challenge the challenge, to ban the bans. I had a conversation with Tom earlier this summer, and one of the things, Tom, that you said was, look, this is what did you say? This is a small group of very vocal, very organized people. And to your point, Skye, when you said, I think we were caught off guard a little bit. I have a question for each of you to close this out with you all. At this point, we're probably all thinking, well, how can we help, right? We're library patrons, we're library supporters, we're library workers, we're foundation workers, we're friends, how can we help? Just each one of you, what is something quickly, succinctly that we can do as general public who loves our libraries and who agrees fully with much of the statements that were made here? What can we do?
A couple of things. Go out and advocate. When you see it and hear it at your school, at your library, go and do it. Donate if that's what you can do and do best. I think, in Washington, we almost had a library closed down this year. We would have been the first state to have it closed for ban, but our foundation stepped up and actually supported them with some additional funds in their effort to stop that from happening. So wherever you can, even if it's within your state, if you can do it, step in and help.
Nick?
Definitely vote. Absolutely. I see in the chat. That's number one.
Yeah.
Number one. A lot of these conversations should be sort of coupled with a voter registration drive. I think that even folding that into some of the teen programs that we do and adult programs. But yeah, Tom, what he's saying is really important. you know, your audience necessarily isn't like the folks on this call who really love libraries. It's the people who are sort of like concerned about democratic institutions more broadly, and people who might not use the library, but advocating, you know, to them, talking with them about how important these institutions are. And it takes support, it takes participation, it takes like going into a library and talking with the workers there who are facing some of these threats head on, and asking them what they need, you know, for some support and solidarity, standing shoulder to shoulder with a teen at a school board meeting, showing them that, you know, you're as courageous as they are. Stand up and sort of, you know, show your support for somebody who's actually, you know, trying to push back on something that's really important to them. So it's community building, it's standing shoulder to shoulder with people, it's getting out and voting.
I love it. Skye.
I would say, and Nick, he just nailed it. I was going to say very simply, protect your librarians. We may not be, it may not be us, but we've already discussed that there are so many librarians, library workers who are being threatened, who are being fired, who are under fire, who are being called groomers. When you hear that in your community, speak out against it, because we know that that's not the truth.
And they often represent those communities that the book bans are targeting, and these groups are targeting. And so, you know, they are living this day in, day out, not only at work, but when they go home too.
That's right. That's exactly
David.
right, Tom.
Thoughts?
My colleagues have talked about use your library, be a supporter, be in solidarity with the workers. But I'll add one more thing, and we're starting to do this in Massachusetts. We have about 5 bills at this point that are being sponsored by different elected officials from all parts of the state. They're not all using the same language. Some are geared towards protecting library workers in the exercise of their duties, that they cannot be fired or harassed for doing their job. Another set are focused on the right to read and the freedom to read. And then another set are focused on the rights of libraries to purchase materials fairly for all of the patrons that we serve. That is another dimension to this topic that we haven't touched on tonight, but is just as important for what is a library without the books. We are more than that, but books, reading, and literacy still very much at the core. So I would ask that we pay attention to what can happen at local legislatures to move things in the opposite, positive, protective direction, not in the direction that things are currently going in.
And that's certainly something that we feel here in San Diego. And I think one of you did just allude to it like slightly during the conversation. The financial constraints, the lack of public investment can be seen as censorship itself. When you do not have the resources to fill the shelves with, you know, an equitable array of materials that speak to everyone in the community. Misty, last word. What can we do to help?
You know, my colleagues, of course, have summed it beautifully, but, and David said it a little bit, pay attention.
Yeah.
Pay attention to what is happening, because that's what they're counting on. They're counting on you to not be paying attention. I was talking to a colleague, and, you know, that's what she said. She's like, I've never gone to a school board meeting before, but now I have people coming, you know, trying to ban books, trying to, you know, and she's like, now I have to go to every school board meeting because I can't let this happen in my child's school. And that's what it is. That's how, you know, they're getting, you know, traction. And yeah, it's a very small group, but they're very organized, and they did catch us off guard. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's so important that we were involved in this and that we're standing up. Is it's not just about the providing access, but it's continuing to push the message that this censorship and banning of books and restricting information is wrong. It's wrong. At the very base.
That conversation with Tom this summer really stuck with me, you know, and you know, we're all here because not only do we believe in the value and the impact of our local library, but we love the work that you all do. and value the work that you and your staffs do every single day to serve our communities. And to that point, Eric, the work that you all are doing at the Office for Intellectual Freedom and ALA, thank you. I had a chance to have a longer conversation with Eric yesterday. It was really an enlightening opportunity to understand exactly what that office does. And it's not just what that office does on perhaps a weekly or daily basis, but on an hourly basis. There are, so many libraries and public institutions that are facing these challenges. But thank you. I want to thank each of you. Again, like I said, I think just for me personally, and I know for many of our supporters and your supporters as well, this has been perhaps one of the most insightful conversations on this subject. And I really do hope that the folks that are listening to this, both now and in the future, will heed all of your advice to vote, advocate, get involved, pay attention, understand what's happening, and stand in solidarity with our librarians. And so with that, I want to say thank you. I would like to encourage our guests and you all to raise a glass to toast the incredible work that you all have done in 2023 and look forward to supporting all of your amazing work in 2024. Cheers. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Libraries really do lead the way. And please make sure you visit booksunbanned.com and find out other ways that you can get involved and support not only this effort, but your local library itself. Have a wonderful year end. Thank you.